Ancient history is filled with monuments, artifacts, and structures that should have simple explanations. But many of them do not. Across remote landscapes, massive stones were cut, transported, and assembled with a precision that still feels unsettling today. Some blocks weigh dozens of tons, yet fit together with edges so exact that barely a blade could slide between them. In several sites, entire complexes follow precise geometric patterns or align with celestial cycles that repeat over centuries. The materials can be measured and the age estimated, but the technical skill behind many of these constructions remains difficult to fully reconstruct. These silent structures endure as physical evidence that ancient engineering and ancient knowledge may have been far more complex than we assume. Hidden within the rugged valleys of northern Italy, where the Alps begin to rise and rivers cut through ancient stone, lies one of the most extraordinary archives ever created by human hands. The Valcamonica petroglyphs are not a single monument, not a ruined temple, not a lost city swallowed by time. They are something far more enigmatic. They are a vast, open-air archive, a stone library carved slowly, patiently, and deliberately across thousands of years. More than 100,000 engravings have been documented across the rocks of Valcamonica, and scholars believe that many more remain undiscovered. What makes this site profoundly mysterious is not only the number of carvings, but their astonishing chronological span. The earliest engravings date back to roughly 8,000 years before the Common Era, during the Mesolithic period. The carving tradition continued through the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and even into Roman times. Few places on Earth demonstrate such an uninterrupted artistic and symbolic continuity. This was not a brief artistic phase. It was not the work of a single culture. It was a tradition sustained for millennia. Imagine a library without parchment ink or written language. Instead of pages, there are slabs of glacially smoothed rock. Instead of letters, there are human figures, animals, geometric patterns, weapons, plows, chariots, jewels, solar symbols, and abstract signs. Layer upon layer of imagery accumulates over centuries, sometimes carved beside older figures, sometimes directly over them, as if new generations were responding to or reinterpreting what came before. The result is a silent dialogue across time. Unlike written civilizations that left behind decipherable scripts, the creators of these petroglyphs left no key to interpretation. There is no Rosetta Stone for Valcamonica. The carvings speak, but in a language we do not fully understand. They record something: belief systems, social hierarchies, mythologies, agricultural life, territorial claims, yet they refuse to explain themselves. What makes this stone library especially compelling is its continuity. Archaeological dating methods, including stylistic analysis and stratigraphic examination of superimposed carvings, reveal evolving artistic styles. Early figures are often simpler and more abstract. Later images become increasingly complex, detailed, and narrative-driven. Weapons appear. Scenes of combat emerge. Agricultural tools are introduced. Chariots roll across stone surfaces. Symbols become more intricate. It is as though we are witnessing the visual evolution of human consciousness. Yet why here? Why did this valley become a focal point for such sustained symbolic expression? Was it considered sacred ground, a territorial boundary, a ceremonial gathering place, or perhaps a crossroads for migrating communities who left their marks as declarations of presence? The mystery deepens when we consider the sheer effort involved. Carving into stone is not a casual act. It demands intention. Each engraving was created using a technique known as pecking. This involves repeatedly striking the rock's surface with a harder tool, initially stone, later metal, to chip away tiny fragments until a shape emerges. It is a slow, physically demanding process. To produce a single detailed human figure could require thousands of precise strikes. Now multiply that by 100,000. The surfaces chosen for carving were not random. Many are glacially polished sandstone slabs angled toward the sun. Some are located on steep slopes, requiring careful positioning and balance. Others lie exposed to harsh alpine weather, meaning the artists understood the durability of their chosen surfaces. Despite the primitive tools available during earlier periods, the engravings often display remarkable proportional accuracy. Human figures show consistent anatomical stylization. Weapons are depicted with recognizable detail. Geometric shapes demonstrate symmetry and balance. In some panels, repeated motifs align in structured compositions, suggesting deliberate planning rather than spontaneous decoration. Even more striking is the evidence of layering without chaos. When later generations carved over older images, they did so selectively. In some cases, older carvings were preserved within new compositions, almost as if integrated into an expanding visual narrative. This indicates not random vandalism, but awareness of the past. Consider the patience required. Each indentation had to be controlled. A misplaced strike could distort the figure. Yet many carvings maintain smooth contours and evenly textured surfaces. The artisans achieved visual coherence across expansive rock faces without grids, rulers, or written guidelines. Some panels contain complex scenes with multiple interacting figures. Maintaining proportional relationships at such scale implies advanced spatial awareness. It challenges assumptions that prehistoric communities lacked refined technical skill. Their tools may have been simple, but their execution was anything but. The most extraordinary aspect of the Valcamonica petroglyphs may not be a single image, but the accumulated weight of time embedded in stone. Over thousands of years, countless individuals, perhaps priests, warriors, farmers, shamans, leaders, or anonymous community members, approached these rocks and contributed to a growing archive. Each strike of stone against stone was a conscious decision to leave a mark. What compels a society to return to the same surfaces for millennia? Oral traditions fade. Settlements move. Political systems collapse. Yet here, generation after generation chose to inscribe meaning into the same valley walls. This continuity suggests that Valcamonica was more than a habitation zone. It may have functioned as a ritual landscape, a place where identity, cosmology, and memory converged. The engravings may have served as territorial markers, ceremonial records, mythological storytelling devices, or even astronomical references tied to seasonal cycles. But without text, certainty remains elusive. Modern technology allows researchers to use three-dimensional scanning, photogrammetry, and microscopic analysis to study the carvings in unprecedented detail. These methods confirm the controlled depth and repeated consistency of the pecking technique. They reveal subtle differences between chronological phases. They highlight intentional composition patterns invisible to the naked eye. Yet technology has not solved the fundamental mystery. We can measure the depth of each indentation. We can approximate the age of each layer. We can categorize motifs and compare them to other European prehistoric art traditions. But we still cannot fully decode the intention behind this immense stone archive. The Valcamonica petroglyphs stand as a paradox. They are overwhelmingly visible, exposed to sunlight, accessible, documented, and yet profoundly silent. They are one of the largest bodies of prehistoric imagery in the world, and still they guard their meanings. In a sense, the valley itself becomes a time machine. To walk among these carved rocks is to stand inside an ancient library whose pages are stone and whose authors lived across 10,000 years. The technical precision of each engraving testifies to skill and discipline. The chronological continuity testifies to cultural endurance. And together, they pose a haunting question. If an entire civilization writes its story not with ink, but with stone and leaves no translation behind, are we reading history or merely glimpsing shadows of something far more complex than we ever imagined? High on the windswept Altiplano of Bolivia, at an altitude of nearly 12,500 feet above sea level, stands a monument that seems almost defiant in its silence. The Gate of the Sun is not enormous by the standards of pyramids or temples, yet it carries a weight far heavier than its 10 tons of stone. Carved from a single block of andesite and erected in one of the harshest inhabited landscapes on Earth, it represents not only technical achievement, but also the lingering enigma of an entire civilization that rose, flourished, and then disappeared without leaving behind written records to explain itself. The first mystery begins with the stone itself. The monument is hewn from a single monolithic block, estimated to weigh around 10 tons. Andesite is a dense volcanic rock extremely difficult to shape with primitive tools. It does not fracture easily, nor does it lend itself to careless carving. Every surface of the gate displays deliberate workmanship, straight edges, precise angles, and carefully smoothed planes that suggest patient, skilled labor. But the question that unsettles researchers is not merely how it was carved, it is how it arrived there. The Altiplano is a vast, high-altitude plateau marked by thin air, freezing nights, intense ultraviolet radiation, and wide seasonal temperature fluctuations. Even today, transporting heavy industrial equipment across this terrain presents logistical challenges. In the period when Tiwanaku thrived, roughly between the 5th and the 10th centuries CE, there were no wheeled vehicles in the Andes capable of hauling multi-ton blocks. There were no draft animals comparable to horses or oxen. Llamas, the primary pack animals of the region, could carry only modest loads. The nearest likely quarry sources for andesite lie miles away across uneven terrain. How then was a 10-ton monolith extracted, transported, and erected at nearly 12,500 feet? Scholars propose systems of human labor, wooden rollers ropes made from plant fibers, and carefully organized communal effort. Experimental archaeology has shown that coordinated groups can move surprisingly heavy objects without advanced machinery. Yet the environmental conditions of the Altiplano add a layer of difficulty that makes such feats astonishing. Oxygen levels are significantly lower at that altitude. Physical endurance declines more rapidly. Every task requires more effort. The very existence of the Gate of the Sun in this location forces us to reconsider assumptions about technological limits. It suggests a society capable not only of engineering, but of large-scale organization, of mobilizing labor, coordinating logistics, and sustaining a vision powerful enough to justify the immense effort involved. A single monolithic block does not stand upright in such a place without intention. And yet the stone is only half the story. The greater enigma lies in the civilization that placed it there. Tiwanaku was once the center of one of the most influential cultures in pre-Columbian South America. Long before the rise of the Inca Empire, Tiwanaku dominated large parts of the southern Andes. Archaeological evidence indicates advanced agricultural systems, including raised field farming techniques that allowed crops to survive frost in the high-altitude climate. Massive stone platforms, sunken courts, and carefully aligned structures suggest architectural planning on an impressive scale. Trade networks extended across vast distances, linking diverse ecological zones. But unlike civilizations such as Egypt or Mesopotamia, Tiwanaku left no deciphered written language. There are no historical chronicles composed by its own scribes. Everything we know about it comes from excavation carbon dating analysis of construction techniques and comparison with later Andean traditions. Its people did not leave behind a narrative. They left monuments. The Gate of the Sun stands among these monuments like a silent witness to lost knowledge. Its presence implies a society confident in its permanence. Monolithic architecture often symbolizes endurance, an attempt to outlast time itself, and for centuries, Tiwanaku did endure. At its height, it may have supported tens of thousands of inhabitants. The city functioned as a political, economic, and religious hub in a region that modern observers once considered too inhospitable for complex civilization. Yet sometime around the 10th century CE, Tiwanaku began to decline. The reasons remain debated. Some researchers point to prolonged droughts that may have destabilized agricultural production. Others suggest internal political fragmentation or shifts in trade routes. There is no clear evidence of catastrophic invasion or violent destruction. Instead, the city appears to have gradually lost its vitality. Its ceremonial core was eventually abandoned. The population dispersed. What makes this disappearance particularly haunting is the absence of a definitive explanation. Civilizations typically leave traces of their collapsed burn layers, mass graves, abrupt cultural replacement. In Tiwanaku's case, the transition seems more elusive. The monumental stones remained, the Gate of the Sun endured, but the society that gave them meaning faded into obscurity. Centuries later, when the Inca encountered the ruins, they regarded Tiwanaku as an ancient and sacred place, already shrouded in myth. In Inca tradition, the site was associated with primordial creation. Even to a powerful empire, accustomed to building in stone, Tiwanaku appeared to belong to a distant, almost mythic past. This reverence suggests that the memory of Tiwanaku's greatness persisted long after its political structure dissolved. The Gate of the Sun thus occupies a peculiar position in history. It is both a technological artifact and a symbol of cultural amnesia. We can measure its dimensions. We can estimate its weight. We can analyze the mineral composition of its stone. But we cannot fully reconstruct the worldview that motivated its creation. We do not know the rituals performed beneath it. We do not know the ceremonies it framed. We do not know the precise moment when it ceased to function as a living monument and became instead a relic. There is something profoundly unsettling about a civilization capable of carving and transporting massive monolithic structures in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth, yet leaving no written testimony of its own achievements. It challenges the modern tendency to equate technological complexity solely with literate societies. Tiwanaku demonstrates that sophistication can exist without surviving texts, that engineering mastery can precede or exist independently of alphabetic systems. The monolithic nature of the Gate of the Sun intensifies this mystery. A single stone, shaped and raised by collective effort, standing against wind and frost for over 1,000 years. It symbolizes unity of purpose. It implies planning that transcends individual lifetimes. And yet whatever ideology, religion, or political structure once unified Tiwanaku's people ultimately proved fragile. Today, the monument stands fractured but upright. The Altiplano wind still sweeps across its surface. The same high-altitude sun that shone on its builders now illuminates tourists and archaeologists who attempt to decipher its meaning. But the essential question remains unresolved. How did a civilization capable of such monumental ambition vanish so quietly? Was it climate? Was it social transformation? Was it a slow erosion of centralized power? Or was it a combination of forces that we can only partially reconstruct through soil samples and isotopic analysis? The Gate of the Sun endures as a paradox. It is a testament to human ingenuity under extreme environmental constraints. It proves that complex societies flourished in places once dismissed as marginal. Yet it also embodies the fragility of cultural memory. Stone can survive millennia. Civilizations cannot. Perhaps that is the deepest mystery of Tiwanaku. Not merely how they moved a 10-ton monolith across the unforgiving Altiplano, not merely how they carved it with such precision, but how a society strong enough to shape stone into enduring symbols could disappear so completely that its voice no longer reaches us, leaving behind only silence, wind, and a gate that opens onto a past we can glimpse but never fully enter. And in that silence, the Gate of the Sun continues to stand, not just as an artifact of ancient engineering, but as a reminder that history is filled with chapters written in stone, yet erased from memory. Scattered across the rolling highlands of northern Laos, the plain of jars appears at first glance almost unreal. Thousands of massive stone vessels resting silently on hilltops and grassy plateaus as though placed there by an unseen hand. There are no towering temples, no carved narratives, no royal inscriptions declaring triumph or divinity. Instead, there is only stone, heavy, weathered, and mute. And within that silence lies one of Southeast Asia's greatest ancient mysteries. What were these colossal jars actually used for, and why were they arranged the way they were? For decades, archaeologists have debated two intertwined questions. Were these jars part of an elaborate mortuary system, an ancient burial practice now mostly lost to time? Or were they components of a far more complex ritual landscape intentionally positioned according to symbolic, territorial, or even astronomical rules? The burial hypothesis remains the most widely accepted explanation, yet even this theory raises as many questions as it answers. Excavations around several jar sites have uncovered human remains buried in the surrounding soil, along with ceramic vessels, iron tools, glass beads, and personal ornaments. Radiocarbon dating suggests activity between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE, although some evidence hints at even earlier occupation of the region. In some cases, bones appear to have been cremated. In others, skeletal fragments were interred directly. This has led researchers to propose that the jars were involved in what is known as secondary burial rituals. According to this interpretation, bodies may have initially been placed inside the stone jars to decompose naturally. After the flesh had decayed, the remaining bones would be collected and reburied in the surrounding ground. This practice is not entirely unprecedented. Variations of secondary burial have appeared in different cultures across Asia and beyond. The immense size of the jars, some weighing more than 10 tons, would have allowed them to function as temporary chambers for decomposition. Yet here the mystery deepens. Not all jars contain evidence of human remains. In fact, many appear completely empty. If they were primarily burial containers, Why is there such inconsistency? Were some jars reserved for elites, while others served symbolic roles? Were organic traces simply lost over centuries of erosion and looting? Or were the jars never meant to hold bodies at all? Another complication arises from the diversity of burial practices discovered near the jars. Some graves contain grave goods, others do not. Some bodies were cremated, others were not. This variation suggests a complex ritual system rather than a single standardized funerary method. It raises the possibility that the jars were part of a broader ceremonial landscape, a place where death, transformation, and memory were enacted through multiple overlapping traditions. Local legends add yet another layer to the puzzle. Folklore speaks of giants who once inhabited the land and crafted the jars to brew vast quantities of rice wine after a victorious battle. While mythological in tone, such stories reflect a collective recognition of the jar's extraordinary scale. Even centuries ago, communities who encountered them could not easily explain how such massive objects had been carved and transported without advanced technology. Beyond their possible funerary function lies an equally compelling mystery: the deliberate distribution of the jars across the landscape. They are not randomly scattered. Instead, they appear in clusters, sometimes dozens, sometimes hundreds, strategically positioned on elevated terrain with sweeping views of the surrounding valleys. This pattern suggests intentional placement. Many sites occupy hilltops or ridgelines overlooking ancient travel routes. Some researchers believe the jars may have marked territorial boundaries or served as monumental statements of community identity. In a region that once connected inland Laos with what is now Vietnam and Thailand, these highland plateaus may have functioned as important nodes in prehistoric trade networks. If so, the jars could have signaled power, spiritual authority, or ancestral claims over key transit corridors. The spatial arrangement within individual sites is equally intriguing. At certain locations, jars are grouped in loose circular formations. Elsewhere, they align in subtle linear patterns following the contours of the land. Although no definitive astronomical alignments have been confirmed, the repeated choice of elevated panoramic settings suggests a relationship between monument and horizon. Were the jars positioned to frame sunrise or sunset during significant seasonal transitions? Were they meant to be seen from afar, monumental markers visible to approaching travelers? Even the orientation of the jars themselves invites scrutiny. Many have openings facing upward, exposed to the sky. If they were used for decomposition, this orientation would have allowed rainwater and air to enter, facilitating natural processes. But symbolically open mouths directed toward the heavens could also represent a connection between earth and sky, life and afterlife, the mortal world, and ancestral realms. Archaeological surveys have revealed that the jars were carved from sandstone, granite, or limestone, quarried miles away. Transporting blocks weighing several tons across rugged terrain without wheeled vehicles would have required organized labor and technical ingenuity. Such effort implies that the jars held profound social or spiritual significance. Communities do not invest that scale of energy into random constructions. What makes the Plain of Jars particularly enigmatic is the absence of accompanying monumental architecture. Unlike ancient Egypt's pyramids or the temple complexes of Angkor, there are no surviving palaces, no inscribed stelae, no elaborate relief carvings explaining their meaning. The jars stand alone. This isolation intensifies their mystery. It suggests that the society responsible for them either left few durable records or expressed its beliefs primarily through landscape rather than written language. Modern archaeology faces another obstacle. Much of the region was heavily bombed during 20th century conflicts. Unexploded ordnance still litters parts of the plateau, limiting excavation. Entire clusters of jars remain only partially studied. It is entirely possible that crucial evidence, human remains, ritual objects, or structural features lies hidden beneath soil that has yet to be safely cleared. In this sense, the Plain of Jars is not merely a puzzle of ancient function, but also a landscape suspended between past and present. Each jar is both artifact and question mark. If they were burial containers, they reflect a sophisticated mortuary tradition emphasizing transformation and ancestral reverence. If they were ritual monuments marking territory or celestial cycles, they reveal a symbolic geography encoded in stone. And if they served multiple roles over centuries, evolving with changing cultural practices, then the plateau becomes a palimpsest of belief systems layered across generations. Perhaps the true mystery lies not in choosing between burial ground and ritual landscape, but in recognizing that ancient societies often blurred those categories. For many cultures, death was inseparable from cosmology, and territory was inseparable from ancestry. A jar placed on a hilltop might simultaneously honor the dead claim land and align with celestial rhythms. Today, as wind moves through the grasses and sunlight shifts across the plateau, the jars remain silent witnesses. They do not reveal whether they once cradled bodies or symbolized spiritual gateways. They offer no inscriptions to guide interpretation. Instead, they invite contemplation, challenging modern observers to imagine a society capable of shaping stone on a monumental scale, yet choosing to communicate through placement absence and enduring ambiguity. The Plain of Jars endures not because it provides clear answers, but because it resists them. Burial site or sacred landscape, random scatter or carefully designed pattern, each hypothesis illuminates part of the story, yet none fully resolves it. And perhaps that unresolved tension, the balance between evidence and imagination, is what makes this highland plateau one of the most haunting archaeological mysteries in the ancient world. Beneath the quiet farmland of Zhejiang province in eastern China lies a subterranean world so vast and deliberate that it challenges everything we assume about ancient engineering. The Longyu Caves were not discovered by archaeologists following a trail of inscriptions or legends. They were found accidentally in the early 1990s when villagers began draining what they believed were ordinary ponds. As the water receded, something astonishing emerged: enormous man-made caverns carved directly into solid sandstone, hidden in silence for centuries, perhaps millennia. What makes the Longyu Caves one of the most unsettling ancient mysteries is not merely their existence. It is their scale, almost irrational for their supposed era, and the haunting uniformity of the carvings that cover nearly every surface within. Together, these two elements form a puzzle that refuses to fit neatly into the known narrative of early Chinese history. So far, more than 24 large caverns have been identified, each one artificially excavated. On average, a single chamber spans roughly 1,000 square meters, with ceilings rising as high as 30 meters. These are not small tunnels or simple storage pits. They are cathedral-like voids, hollowed from stone, supported by carefully preserved pillars left standing to bear the immense weight above. Archaeologists estimate that nearly 1 million cubic meters of rock were removed to create the known caves alone. To put this into perspective, that volume rivals or surpasses many above-ground monumental projects of antiquity. Yet unlike pyramids or temples, the Longyou caves are entirely underground, requiring not only excavation but structural foresight. Workers would have had to plan every cut carefully, ensuring that the remaining columns and walls could sustain the pressure of the earth overhead. If the caves date back roughly 2,000 years, as some scholars tentatively propose, then we are looking at one of the largest underground excavation efforts of the ancient world. And yet there is no definitive record of a massive state-sponsored labor campaign in this region corresponding to such a project. No imperial decree describes it. No local chronicle praises its completion. The silence in historical documentation is as vast as the chambers themselves. Imagine the logistics involved. Thousands of laborers would have been required. Tools would have needed constant maintenance. Removed stone had to be transported elsewhere. Yet there are no massive spoil heaps in the surrounding landscape, clearly linked to the excavation. The coordination alone implies advanced planning, resource management, and engineering understanding. For a project of this magnitude, secrecy would have been nearly impossible, and yet somehow the caves vanished from collective memory. Even more perplexing is the structural precision. The ceilings slope subtly, possibly to manage moisture or water runoff. The pillars are positioned with consistent spacing, suggesting pre-calculated load distribution. These are not random hollows carved in haste. They are measured, deliberate spaces that indicate an understanding of stone behavior under stress, working in dim underground conditions with ancient tools. How did the builders achieve such stability that the chambers have endured for centuries without catastrophic collapse? If the scale of the caves feels irrational, the carvings within feel almost surreal. Nearly every surface, walls, ceilings, pillars is covered in parallel chisel marks. These are not chaotic tool scars left behind accidentally. They form deliberate, consistent patterns that angle uniformly across the stone. The grooves are evenly spaced, aligned at similar inclinations, and repeated across multiple chambers with astonishing consistency. There are no unfinished patches, no abrupt transitions, no experimental variations. The same textural language repeats itself chamber after chamber, as though following a master blueprint or a strict aesthetic doctrine. Creating such uniform striations would have required disciplined labor and standardized technique. Each worker would need to replicate the same angle and spacing over thousands of square meters. The cumulative number of carved lines likely reaches into the millions, and yet the visual rhythm remains steady, almost hypnotic. Why invest so much energy into carving patterns that serve no obvious structural purpose? The grooves do not appear necessary for stability. They are not inscriptions conveying historical information. They are not decorative motifs in the conventional sense. Instead, they create a textured environment that transforms the entire cavern into a monumental artwork, subtle, repetitive, and strangely modern in its abstraction. Some researchers have suggested that the markings may have helped control moisture or prevent erosion. Others argue they are simply the byproduct of quarrying techniques. But this explanation struggles against the evidence. The patterns are too consistent, too universal, too intentional to be dismissed as mere leftovers of excavation. If the caves were quarries, why shape the chambers into vast symmetrical halls supported by evenly spaced pillars? Why leave the surfaces meticulously patterned rather than roughly cut if they were storage spaces or military shelters? Why embellish them with labor-intensive texturing that no one would see in darkness? The carvings feel ceremonial in their repetition, yet there are no murals, no statues, no clear religious symbols dominating the space. The decoration is geometric and minimalistic, almost abstract, an ocean of diagonal lines sweeping across stone. The deeper one looks, the stranger the mystery becomes. The caves display advanced understanding of spatial planning, yet they lack inscriptions identifying their builders. Ancient China is renowned for meticulous record-keeping across dynasties. Monumental construction projects, from canals to palaces, were typically documented in official histories. And yet nothing unambiguously describes a massive subterranean complex in Longyu. It is as if the builders deliberately erased their signature. The combination of immense scale and uniform carving suggests centralized organization. Random villagers could not have coordinated such a feat. The caves required leadership, architectural vision, and sustained manpower. But if an empire commanded this work, why leave no trace of its intent? Were the caves part of a forgotten regional power, a secretive ritual complex, an ambitious but ultimately abandoned imperial experiment? Or could they represent a function so practical and commonplace to their creators that it was never considered worthy of grand historical mention? Standing inside one of the chambers today, visitors often describe a sense of awe mixed with unease. The pillars rise like silent sentinels. The carved lines ripple across stone in endless repetition. The absence of ornamentation beyond those grooves intensifies the feeling of purpose without explanation. Scale alone can inspire wonder. Pattern alone can evoke beauty. But the Longyu caves combine both in a way that feels deliberate yet opaque. They are too large to ignore, too uniform to dismiss, too silent to understand. In the end, the true mystery of the Longyu caves may not lie solely in who built them, but in the mindset required to conceive them, to remove nearly 1 million cubic meters of rock, to carve chamber after chamber with unwavering consistency, to leave behind a subterranean labyrinth that feels at once ancient and strangely timeless. The irrational scale challenges our assumptions about labor capacity in antiquity. The uniform carvings challenge our assumptions about artistic intention and organization. Together, they form a riddle carved in stone, one that has endured not because it was preserved in texts, but because it was buried beneath earth and water, waiting for rediscovery. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is this: the caves were never meant to impress us. They were built for a purpose known only to their creators. We are simply late arrivals wandering through a silent monument whose true story remains sealed in the stone itself. Long before written language emerged in East Asia, before bronze weapons or monumental stone temples reshaped the landscape, prehistoric communities across the Japanese archipelago were creating objects that continue to defy simple explanation. These were the Dogu small clay figurines crafted during the Jomon period, a vast span of time, stretching from approximately 14,000 to 300 BCE. At first glance, Dogu may appear modest in scale. Most stand no taller than 30 centimeters. Yet their small size conceals something extraordinary. Their forms are unsettling, almost alien. Their craftsmanship is unexpectedly sophisticated. And their very existence challenges long-held assumptions about what prehistoric societies were capable of imagining and creating. This is not merely a story about ancient clay sculptures. It is a story about technical mastery, where none was expected, and about figures whose shapes feel disturbingly non-human. For much of modern history, the Jomon people were described in simplistic terms: hunter-gatherers living in pit dwellings, dependent on fishing, foraging, and seasonal mobility. In older academic narratives, such societies were assumed to produce only functional tools: pots, arrowheads, fishing implements crafted for survival rather than symbolic expression. Dogu disrupt that narrative completely. Many of these figurines display remarkably intricate surface decoration. Spirals, chord-marked impressions, raised ridges, and geometric motifs wrap around their torsos and limbs in carefully balanced compositions. The patterns are not random scratches. They are deliberate, rhythmic, and often symmetrical. Some appear to mirror textile designs or body adornments, suggesting an aesthetic language that was already highly developed. Consider the detailing around the torso. Layered bands encircle the midsection with near mathematical consistency. Raised clay appliques are positioned with care. Incised lines maintain uniform depth and spacing. Even without metal tools, Jomon artisans achieved an astonishing degree of refinement using bone, stone, and wooden implements. The clay itself required knowledge. It had to be selected, purified, shaped, dried, and fired under controlled conditions. Uneven firing would crack the figurine. Too much moisture would warp it. Too little would cause brittleness. The survival of thousands of dogu fragments indicates a consistent, repeatable ceramic tradition, evidence of technical understanding passed down across generations. Some examples, particularly from the late Jomon period, demonstrate structural sophistication. Limbs are carefully proportioned to support the weight of the torso. Hollow sections reduce stress fractures during firing. Decorative ridges are integrated into the structure rather than applied carelessly afterward. This is not experimental craft. It is confident execution. And that raises a question: why invest so much technical effort into objects that had no obvious utilitarian function? Dogu were not storage vessels. They were not cooking pots. They were not weapons. Their purpose appears symbolic, ritualistic, or perhaps something else entirely. The level of detail suggests that their appearance mattered deeply. Every curve and incision carried meaning. In a society without monumental architecture, these small clay figures may have functioned as portable monuments of belief. If the craftsmanship commands respect, the shapes themselves provoke unease. Dogu do not resemble naturalistic human figures. Their proportions are exaggerated, distorted, sometimes almost mechanical. Many possess enormous eyes, oval goggle-like, protruding from stylized faces. The so-called Shakoki Dogu, named after snow goggles used by Arctic peoples, are perhaps the most famous examples. Their eye shapes are so distinctive that they dominate the entire head. The bodies are equally perplexing. Hips and thighs are often enlarged, suggesting fertility symbolism. Yet the limbs may be shortened or segmented in ways that feel unnatural. Some torsos are armored in what appears to be layered plating. Others are encased in patterns resembling protective suits. Are these stylized representations of clothing, ritual garments, scarification, or something more abstract? An attempt to depict spiritual transformation rather than physical anatomy. The faces rarely show clear emotional expression. Instead, they convey stillness. Their mouths are small or absent, their noses minimal. The overwhelming focus remains on the eyes, wide, hollow, sometimes piercing. To modern observers, this combination of exaggerated features and technical precision creates cognitive dissonance. The figurines are clearly intentional. They are carefully crafted. Yet they do not aim for realism. They seem to belong to a symbolic system that is no longer accessible to us. Some fringe theories have attempted to interpret Dogu as depictions of extraterrestrial beings or ancient astronauts. These ideas persist largely because the figurines appear so unlike typical human art from early agricultural societies. However, mainstream archaeology finds no evidence to support such claims. Instead, scholars suggest that the distortion reflects spiritual concepts, perhaps representing deities, shamans in trance, or mythic ancestors. Yet even within academic explanations, uncertainty remains. Why the goggles? Why the segmented limbs? Why the almost mechanical symmetry? These are not casual artistic flourishes. They appear repeatedly across wide geographic areas, indicating shared symbolic conventions. The repetition suggests a visual code, one that once carried meaning powerful enough to justify its meticulous reproduction. It is important to recognize how revolutionary this is in context. The Jomon period predates many of the world's earliest urban civilizations. While Mesopotamia and Egypt would later build massive stone monuments, the Jomon people were developing an equally compelling, though far less monumental visual culture. Their pottery is already famous for elaborate chord-marked designs. Dogu extend that aesthetic into 3 dimensions, transforming decorative language into anthropomorphic form. This implies something profound. Symbolic complexity does not require cities. Spiritual imagination does not require writing. Technical skill does not require metal. The artisans who shaped Dogu were not anonymous primitives. They were skilled craftspeople operating within an established artistic tradition. Their community recognized value in abstraction, in exaggeration, in symbolic distortion. The figurines may have represented fertility, protection, healing, or cosmological forces. Many were intentionally broken before burial, perhaps, as part of ritual release. But even in fragments, the precision of their design remains visible. Broken or whole, they continue to radiate intention. More than 15,000 Dogu have been discovered across Japan, particularly in northern Honshu and Hokkaido. Despite their number, no written explanation accompanies them. The Jomon people left no deciphered script. Their worldview must be reconstructed from artifacts alone. And artifacts can only speak in fragments. We can measure their symmetry. We can analyze their clay composition. We can compare stylistic variations across regions. But we cannot fully access the symbolic language that shaped their creation. Were these figures guardians, fertility icons, embodiments of spirits inhabiting nature, representations of altered states of consciousness? Or did they serve purposes we have not even imagined? The paradox remains striking. These objects are technically sophisticated, yet conceptually opaque. They demonstrate artistic control, yet withhold narrative clarity. They appear deliberate in every line, yet refuse to reveal what they were meant to convey. Perhaps that is the enduring power of Dogu. They remind us that ancient societies were not simple. They possessed complex inner worlds, belief systems, myths, symbolic frameworks that may never be fully recovered. The precision of their craftsmanship proves intelligence. The strangeness of their forms proves imagination. And together, they form a mystery that has survived for thousands of years, quiet, compact, and carved in clay. When you stand before a Dogu in a museum gallery, separated from it by glass and centuries, one thought becomes unavoidable. These were not random creations. Someone shaped them with intention. Someone understood their meaning, and that meaning is now lost to time. What remains is the evidence of mastery and the haunting outline of something we still do not understand. On the vast necropolis plateau of Saqqara, where the sands preserve the memory of dynasties and the horizon is punctuated by pyramids, there stands a structure that does not rise toward the sky. It does not shimmer with polished casing stones. It carries no carved scenes of gods, no inscriptions proclaiming divine kingship. And yet, it may be one of the most important and most mysterious stone constructions in the entire history of ancient Egypt. The monument is known as Giza el Mudir, a name meaning roughly the governor's bridge. It is not a bridge. It is not a pyramid. It is not even clearly a tomb. What it is, however, is a colossal rectangular enclosure built from massive limestone blocks, possibly dating to the late Second Dynasty, before the age of pyramid building had truly begun. And that is precisely where the mystery begins. Unlike the Step Pyramid complex of Djoser nearby, which proudly announces royal ambition through scale symbolism and architectural innovation, Gizeh el-Mudir remains almost entirely silent. There are no inscriptions naming a king, no dedicatory texts, no relief carvings, no clear iconography. In ancient Egypt, monumental architecture was rarely anonymous. Kings built to immortalize themselves. Temples were covered in hieroglyphs. Tombs preserved identity through text and image. But here in this massive enclosure, stretching approximately 650 meters in length and 350 meters in width, there is no clear signature. It is as if an enormous project was undertaken, and then history chose not to remember who commissioned it. This absence is not a minor detail. It is the central enigma. Who builds something this large and leaves no explanation? Archaeological analysis suggests that Gizeh el-Mudir may predate the Step Pyramid of Djoser, traditionally considered the first large-scale stone monument in Egypt. If this dating is correct, then Gizeh el-Mudir could represent one of the earliest experiments in monumental stone construction anywhere in the world. That possibility changes everything. Before the Third Dynasty, Egyptian royal structures were primarily built of mud brick. Stone was used sparingly. Yet here stands a vast enclosure composed of enormous, roughly dressed limestone blocks, arranged in double walls with an internal fill. The construction required organization, labor coordination, quarrying, transportation, and architectural planning on a scale that should have left clearer historical traces. Instead, we find a technological leap with no clear narrative bridge. Was this a prototype, a failed experiment, a transitional phase lost between dynasties? If Gizeh el-Mudir truly predates Djoser, then the story of pyramid evolution may not begin with the Step Pyramid at all. It may begin here, in an architectural trial whose purpose remains unclear. The structure consists of two massive parallel stone walls with a rubble-filled space between them. The walls are thick and imposing, yet the interior of the enclosure contains no obvious large-scale superstructure. No pyramid base, no preserved temple remains of comparable scale, no clear burial chamber. Why construct such formidable boundaries around what exactly enclosures in Egypt often defined sacred space? They separated the divine from the mundane. They established ritual zones, but the sheer scale of this one suggests something more significant than a minor ceremonial courtyard. The walls themselves feel defensive in mass, but there is no evidence of military function. They feel symbolic, but without decoration. They feel royal, but without royal identification. It is architecture without context. If Gizeh el-Mudir was meant to be a funerary complex, then where is the tomb? Excavations have not revealed a definitive burial chamber comparable to those found beneath later pyramids. No sarcophagus, no burial shaft clearly aligned with the enclosure's central axis in the way later royal monuments would demonstrate. This absence deepens the mystery. Ancient Egyptian kings were obsessed with burial preparation. Their tombs were the focal point of entire architectural complexes. If a king commissioned this structure, why would the burial element be invisible or entirely absent? One theory suggests that any internal structures may have been dismantled or repurposed in later periods. Another proposes that the enclosure itself was the symbolic monument, perhaps linked to royal ceremonies rather than interment. Yet without inscriptions, every interpretation floats without anchor. The late Second Dynasty was not a period of stability. It was a time of political fragmentation and internal conflict. Some scholars speculate that Gisr el-Mudir may be associated with rulers like Khasakemwi, the final king of the Second Dynasty who reunified Egypt after civil strife. Khasakemwi is known for building large stone structures at Abydos. If he or another transitional ruler experimented with monumental stone architecture at Saqqara, then Gisr el-Mudir might represent an architectural precursor to the Third Dynasty's explosive innovations. But again, no inscription confirms this. The monument stands in chronological ambiguity, close enough to the dawn of pyramid construction to feel connected, yet distant enough in evidence to remain detached. Scale matters, and Gisr el-Mudir is enormous. To quarry transport and position thousands of limestone blocks in a desert environment required centralized authority and logistical sophistication. Labor forces had to be organized, resources had to be allocated, planning had to be precise. Such effort implies importance, yet importance to whom and for what? It is difficult to imagine that such a massive undertaking served a minor ritual function. But without evidence of grand internal structures, the enclosure seems almost excessive, like a frame built for a masterpiece that never arrived. Perhaps the greatest irony of Gisr el-Mudir is that it stands in the shadow of architectural legends. The Step Pyramid complex dominates Saqqara's narrative. Later pyramids refined the form. The Giza Plateau would soon redefine monumentality entirely. Against that backdrop, a rectangular stone enclosure without inscriptions appears modest. But modesty can be misleading. Sometimes the most important chapters in history are the experimental ones, the drafts before the masterpiece. If Gisr el-Mudir was a prototype, it represents the moment when mud brick tradition began transforming into stone ambition. The moment when Egyptian architecture shifted from ephemeral materials to eternal ones. And yet, the documentation of that shift is missing. What makes Gisr el-Mudir truly mysterious is not what we see, but what we do not. No royal name, no definitive tomb, no clear function, no surviving textual reference explaining its construction. It is a structure of immense scale that refuses to tell its story. In ancient Egypt, architecture was propaganda carved in stone. It was theology materialized. It was memory engineered for eternity. But Gisr el-Mudir defies that pattern. It is monumental, but mute. Grand, but anonymous. Perhaps it was a sacred enclosure marking royal ritual space. Perhaps it was an abandoned project. Perhaps it was the architectural laboratory that made the Pyramid Age possible. Or perhaps it represents a chapter of Egyptian history so transitional, so politically unstable, that its builders were erased from the record. Whatever the truth, Gisr el-Mudir forces us to confront a deeper realization, even in a civilization famous for preserving its legacy in stone. Entire narratives can vanish. And sometimes the greatest mystery is not a hidden chamber or a lost treasure, but a colossal monument standing in plain sight, asking a question no inscription ever answered. Along the rugged Mediterranean coastline of southwestern Turkey, carved directly into sheer limestone cliffs, stand some of the most haunting monuments of the ancient world. The Lycian rock-cut tombs. These monumental graves belong to the civilization of Lycia, a culture that flourished roughly from the 2nd millennium BCE until it was absorbed into the Roman sphere. Unlike pyramids rising from desert sands or underground necropolises hidden beneath cities, these tombs defy expectation. They are not buried. They are elevated, sometimes impossibly so, perched high above valleys and rivers as if suspended between worlds. Two elements make them particularly compelling. In the realm of ancient mysteries, their seemingly impossible cliffside locations and the inscriptions carved into their facades, texts that, although partially deciphered, still hold unanswered questions. At first glance, the placement of these tombs feels almost unreal. Consider the monumental Amyntas tomb in modern-day Fethiye. Its grand Ionic columns and temple-like facade are carved directly into a vertical rock face towering above the town. To reach it, even today, requires a steep climb. To imagine its construction more than 2,000 years ago, without modern scaffolding or machinery, is to confront a logistical puzzle. How did Lycian craftsmen carve such precise architectural forms at heights that appear nearly inaccessible? The tomb chambers were not simple shallow niches. Many extend deep into the rock with carefully shaped doorways, interior burial benches, and sometimes multiple rooms. Creating these spaces would have required stable platforms, coordinated labor, and an advanced understanding of stoneworking. Some scholars suggest that wooden scaffolding anchored into the cliff face made construction possible. Others propose that access paths and ledges now eroded once connected different levels. Yet erosion over millennia has erased much of the physical evidence. What remains is the finished result: entire cities of the dead hovering above the living landscape. At Myra Rock Tombs, dozens of tomb facades cluster together like an ancient apartment complex frozen in stone. From a distance, they resemble wooden houses stacked atop one another. Their facades mimic timber architecture beams, crossbars, pitched roofs, all painstakingly reproduced in limestone. The paradox is striking structures that appear wooden, yet are permanently fixed in rock located high enough to be beyond casual human reach. Why place tombs in such elevated, precarious positions? Practicality offers no convincing explanation. Transporting bodies upward would have been arduous. Carving at such heights required extraordinary effort. The choice seems ideological rather than functional. Ancient sources hint that the Lycians believed the soul was carried to the afterlife by winged creatures. Elevation may have symbolized proximity to the heavens, facilitating the spirit's journey. In this interpretation, height was sacred. The dead were not buried into the earth, but lifted toward the sky, occupying a liminal zone between terrestrial and celestial realms. The tombs at Kaunos Rock Tombs reinforce this idea. They face a river valley visible from afar, glowing at sunset, as if illuminated by some otherworldly force. Their commanding vantage point suggests visibility was intentional. The dead were not hidden, they were displayed overlooking the land they once inhabited. This verticality transforms the cliffs themselves into sacred architecture. The mountain becomes both wall and foundation, a natural monument reshaped by human hands. In doing so, the Lycians blurred the boundary between nature and culture. The tomb is neither fully constructed nor entirely natural. It is a hybrid carved from the living rock of the earth. If the location of the tombs raises engineering and symbolic questions, the inscriptions carved upon them deepen the mystery. The Lycians developed their own script, derived in part from the Greek alphabet, yet distinct in phonetics and structure. Over time, scholars have deciphered much of the Lycian language, especially through bilingual inscriptions. However, many texts remain fragmentary, ambiguous, or debated in interpretation. On several tomb facades, inscriptions identify the deceased and sometimes describe lineage or civic role. Yet beyond these basic details, the tone often shifts. Warnings appear stern, prohibitions against disturbing the tomb. Threats of divine punishment are invoked. In some cases, the wording suggests legal enforcement, indicating a society deeply concerned with protecting burial sites. But what exactly did these warnings mean within Lycian cosmology? Were they formulaic legal declarations, or did they reflect a profound fear of spiritual violation? The difficulty lies in nuance. Translation provides vocabulary, but not always worldview. Certain phrases resist definitive interpretation. Words connected to the afterlife, divine forces, or curses do not always correspond neatly to Greek or other Indo-European parallels. Some inscriptions contain grammatical constructions unique to Lycian, complicating efforts to reconstruct full meaning. Moreover, not all inscriptions are complete. Weathering has erased characters. Rockfalls have destroyed entire sections. What survives is a partial conversation across millennia, a text with missing lines. In some tombs, iconography accompanies inscription. Relief carvings depict banquets, warriors, or symbolic motifs. Do these images complement the text, or do they represent independent narratives without comprehensive understanding of Lycian religious belief? Interpretation remains tentative. The interplay between legible script and undeciphered nuance creates a powerful tension. We can read names, we can approximate warnings, yet the emotional and spiritual resonance behind those words remains partly veiled. Another paradox defines these monuments. They are highly visible, yet difficult to access. From the valley floor, they dominate the landscape. From within, they are secluded chambers, cut into solid rock. This duality mirrors the inscriptions themselves, publicly displayed, yet not fully comprehended. Visibility may have served as a reminder of ancestral presence. The living could look upward and see the resting places of elites. The dead were guardians, witnesses, perhaps even intermediaries between community and divine realm. But visibility does not equal transparency. The inscriptions, though, carved openly speak in a language largely lost to time. Their warnings echo faintly, their theological implications uncertain. The Lycian rock-cut tombs represent more than architectural achievement. They embody a worldview structured vertically rather than horizontally. Life occurred in valleys and along coasts. Death ascended into cliffs. Earth below, sky above the deceased, suspended between. Unlike subterranean burials that conceal the dead, these monuments elevate memory. They confront the living daily. Yet despite their openness, they withhold full explanation. Modern archaeology provides tools, epigraphy, stratigraphy, comparative linguistics, but cannot fully restore the cultural imagination that produced these works. The scaffolds are gone, the rituals unrecorded, the complete meanings of certain inscriptions remain elusive. And perhaps that is why the Lycian rock-cut tombs continue to captivate. They are not mysterious because we know nothing about them. On the contrary, we know quite a lot. We know their approximate dates, their stylistic influences, their linguistic affiliations. What we do not know is why a civilization chose to carve its memory into the sky, nor precisely what its stone-carved voices intended to communicate to eternity. Standing beneath those cliffs at dusk, watching the tomb facades darken against the fading light, one senses the deliberate audacity of their placement. They were meant to endure, they were meant to be seen, and they were meant perhaps to speak. Yet even after centuries of study, part of their message remains suspended, like the tombs themselves, between clarity and silence.